I'm John Lewis, and you're listening to 360 Degree City, a podcast where we talk to people who are working to make cities better. Our hope is that after each episode, you'll start to see your own city from a slightly different angle.
And it was bulldozed in 1978. And at the time, it was the largest hotel ever, in North America that had ever been bulldozed. And it just blows my mind that there's such an enormous, comparatively modern structure that only saw 30 years of use.
Maps are a powerful tool that can communicate much more than just where things are located in a city. They can share the history of a place and also provide a sense of nostalgia about a certain place or a certain time in history. So we wanted to talk to someone who integrates art and design with mapmaking.
My name is Raymond Biesinger, and I'm an illustrator and artist. I work for a lot of different magazines and newspapers, but often when I am making personal work, it ends up being on the subject of cities and architecture and history.
In this episode, Raymond and I talk about various Canadian cities, different buildings that have been bulldozed or burned down in Montreal, and his civic atlas of North America. What is it about cities that inspires you?
Well, I think that from an aesthetic standpoint, my style is very rectilinear and geometric. So it works very well with the shapes and forms of modern architecture. I've as an illustrator, I have a few objects that are kryptonite. Like I have been foiled by curly hair, plates of nachos, chili, things that are not ordered, things that are chaotic and hyper organic. Architecture is usually not that. So it comes easily to me. And so as my interest in aesthetics gets deeper and deeper, I'm excited about how politics and history and like the lived environment interact.
Interesting. And that's, we talk a lot about the built form of a city actually manifesting the values or the politics of a particular time, that's interesting that with your background, you're observing that and capturing that as well.
Yeah, it is fascinating to do a illustration of Red Square in Moscow and just see how sectioned off the historical government area is from the rest of society. I mean, it's almost inside three different walls, and you wonder how that informs how government has functioned there over time. That said, I am so not a social scientist. I come at this angle of things as an amateur. I kind of enjoy that when the thinking gets too hard, I can just throw up my hands and say, I'm just an artist. I deal in impressions and emotions. I don't need to be completely accurate all the time, however much I flirt with accuracy a lot of the time.
That's a nice place to be. So you had your city print project that it was over a course of a number of years, focusing on the history of Canadian cities in places like Montreal and Halifax and Winnipeg, and at particular points in time. What compelled you to go through that level of rigor to create that series of prints about Canadian cities?
Well, I lived in Alberta for a very long time, and when I moved to Montreal in 2010, I believe, I wanted to get to know my new region as much as I knew my old region. So I selected Montreal, Toronto, Quebec, and Ottawa, and decided to really get to know them architecturally and to know the layout of them. The historical component, I mean, I was thinking, I could make these cities right now, but that seems pretty boring and is going to feel dated pretty soon. So why don't I choose some sort of popular and perhaps vaguely positive event from these cities' history, just to add some extra excitement into it. So I drew Montreal on the opening day of Expo 67.
The largest World's Fair ever, Expo 67.
Ottawa on VE Day in 1945.
In the nation's capital, a parade of Thanksgiving is held on Parliament Hill. Veterans of two wars mingle as the acting Prime Minister makes an official pronouncement.
Toronto on the day the CN Tower went up in 1976.
This 1,800-foot tower is enough to make King Kong dizzy.
And Quebec City during the Quad Centennial in 2008.
En 2008, Québec, site fondateur de la présence française au Canada et en Amérique, vous invite à célébrer ses 400 ans.
So it really, really did help me understand those cities better, and it brought me out into public a lot because I would go and sell these prints. And I was surprised by how excited people were by these things. It was great to be able to talk history and get very in depth. I mean, these maps that I made each have about 50 to 125 specific buildings that I've drawn from that time.
Hey, I'm Mark Rimmer, a friend of Raymond's, and I also work in the same studio space as John in the Intelligent Futures team. Thought I would chime in to say that Raymond also created city prints of Calgary in the 1988 Olympics, Winnipeg during the general strike in 1919, and Edmonton in July 1983, when the city's summer universiade opened. Now, back to John and Raymond.
How much time would it take you to research one particular city?
Oh my God, so many headaches. The whole series suffers from something I like to call detail inflation. I guess the drug people call it chasing the dragon, where the first ones took about 4 days and had about 40 or 50 specific buildings. By the time the series went on, I just couldn't find myself excited unless the level of detail was much higher than that. So by the time I finished the Edmonton one, that took like 11, 12 days with about 3 times as many specific buildings as before. And at that point, I couldn't afford to continue doing that, like to dedicate that much studio time to the project.
Were there any big surprises that you can recall, either specific or general, that you found in researching these Canadian cities?
I think the most interesting thing that I can think of right now, I mean, research is always fascinating. You're always going to find interesting buildings, interesting locations that you had no idea existed. And that's always a joy. But one thing that really interested me was how people relate to these images themselves. Like, we live in a time and a place, I think, where people really care about how their houses look, and to have like a map on their wall is such like it's almost like clothing for a lot of people. It expresses who they are and a lot about their taste, but also the protective feelings that people have about these images. Like, when I had the original 4 prints, Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, and Quebec City, Montrealers would buy a lot of Montreal and a good mix of the other cities. People in Toronto would buy a lot of Montreal, a lot of Toronto, and nothing else. There's like this cultural desire being expressed there. And people in Quebec City would only buy Quebec City and nothing else. And so there's some cultural things at work there.
Yeah. So you mentioned new directions with your interest in cities and architecture, and you just created your 17 Lost Buildings of Montreal that looks at buildings of architectural, cultural, social importance that have been bulldozed or burned down. Can you maybe describe that and what compelled you to create that?
So I guess to give an overview of the project, basically it is I made a print of Montreal 17 inches by 22 inches that in the center has a map, and around it are 17 different buildings that have been destroyed in Montreal via demolition, neglect, arson, or some combination of those things. Generally, they need to be buildings that were demolished during the lifetime of someone who might be alive right now, though I've stretched that. And and then those buildings are drawn on the periphery and then situated on the map. And so I've just started doing 18 Lost Buildings of Edmonton. All of this is pretty new to me. Like this, I don't even know if it's a series yet, but so I'm just starting to feel around the project. The Montreal one is neat, where like there's something like St. Anne's Market, which in 1849 was burned down by a loyalist mob, and it housed Canada's first parliament. And immediately next to it on the print is Ben's Deli, that was like Montreal's oldest deli before it was shut down in 2008 and bulldozed. So like that kind of juxtaposition I'm really excited about. This is important to our national history, and this is just something that your average person went to and cherished. And then the Edmonton one, it's been interesting. I've posted online some progress of it, and people have been very excited. It is hard to try and reconcile the desire to have like a broad range of uses of buildings that are shown in the print, like a church, a city hall, a train station, a shop, a tower, a sports complex, and also having a wide range in which the buildings were demolished or created. So there's stylistic variety. But then when I post online, all everyone wants is where they hang out in their 20s. Yeah. And like I felt that exact same thing where it's like, oh, I can include the Artery and the Arlington and that Albert's restaurant that I ate at every day when I was hungover after throwing a house party down the street. And yeah, and like I like to think of myself as a total fucking robot that just like deals in data and doesn't care about emotion. But like when I post a progress shot and people are like, the Arlington, oh, you've got to have the Arlington, which was a beloved building that was bulldozed in 2008 after the landlord neglected it a great deal. Yeah, my heartstrings have been pulled, and I'm like, okay, I can afford to like pander to my own emotions or the emotions of people who exist right now, rather than trying to find the perfect classical revival bank that was demolished in 1950 that no one right now remembers. Anyway, it's been pretty cool. I'm excited about it. It's a lot less labor intensive than the like city prints. So I think at least I'm going to do Toronto as well. I want to do Chicago and London, I think. And because you're based in Calgary, I should at least tell you, at least pretend that I'm going to
throw us a bone, huh?
Yeah, totally.
Since recording this interview, Raymond got busy and expanded the Lost Buildings series. He now has 21 Lost Buildings of Edmonton, 18 Lost Buildings of Toronto, 17 Lost Buildings of Ottawa, and 19 Lost Buildings of Calgary.
That's exciting that you're continuing that city work, because I think just your description and looking at your Montreal print, it really highlights a few things, the complexity of the city. So when you're talking about that market and the building of national importance, and then the local deli, all of that makes up the fabric of cities. And then the fact that you're going into places that don't exist anymore really highlight the place and time that cities are always evolving. So combine that with your city prints, and you really understand that there's, the city is always evolving. And so now you're archiving that with some of those prints. And I can see a lot of people, I can see you being pestered with a lot of questions. What's building number 8 on that one? And
yeah. Totally. Well, the titles and the dates that they were standing are there, and I've made sure online at least to put like a small description of each building. And it has been fascinating, like comparing the Montreal and the Edmonton, because Montreal, of course, is a very old city and Edmonton a very new city. And Montreal, like, there's just such an incredible amount of history that this city has kept, that when preparing that print and making it, it didn't really feel like a charged thing. But then, talking with Edmonton people are so excited about this. And maybe Calgary is similar, where Edmonton is obsessed with cleansing itself of history constantly. And so I've studied the architecture of so many different Canadian cities, and there are trends that have been represented in Edmonton. Again, that classical revival bank. It's column-fronted bank that's taller than it is wide, made of white stone or something similar. I think that kind of building is gorgeous. And any other city in Canada, it seems, has 2 or 3 of those. Edmonton had 2 or 3 of them and blew them all up. So there are all these, you go to Hamilton and you can see this broad range of different styles created over a century. And in Edmonton, we're lucky if we have 1 in 3 of those styles there. Maintained. Anyway, it's fascinating. I'm not quite. I feel like Calgary might be similar, or
yeah, for sure. I think that's a pretty Alberta-wide thing. I think that what you're describing in a large part is a bit of a downside of an economy that over the long haul has been pretty thriving. So to compare that with my hometown of Regina,
okay,
the economy in the last 50 years hasn't been doing anything compared to what Alberta's has. And so the result is you still have a lot of interesting buildings downtown because there hasn't been an economic driver to bulldoze them and put up something twice as high.
Yeah, totally. I've heard that about Winnipeg's is it Albert Street, where it's like poverty is the best preserver.
Yeah.
It's like Winnipeg has just been so steady for so long. Again, so they have like blocks and blocks and blocks of original buildings in that zone, and it's beautiful. Yeah,
I think in a lot of those cases, there's layers to it, but a lot of the headliner is the old saying "follow the money," and that's probably a good reason for a lot of it. Yeah.
There are some interesting riddles that I've encountered in this whole thing. Like with the Montreal print, there's a hotel called the Laurentian Hotel, which was made in 1948. It was a 1,000-room hotel right downtown on like René Lévesque and Dorchester Square. It looks like it was made out of Duplo, like the Child's Toy Duplo. And it was tremendous. And it was bulldozed in 1978. And at the time, it was the largest hotel ever, in North America that had ever been bulldozed. And it just blows my mind that there's such an enormous, comparatively modern structure that only saw 30 years of use. And I remember Edmonton had a city hall as well that I think was used for like 27 years. That was made in like the 60s. Anyway, that stuff fascinates me when it's just these new buildings that have so short of lifespans. And there's always... Yeah, I imagine there's a story there that if I had more time to research, I would get deeper into.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so one last project I just wanted to touch on was the Civic Atlas of North America. Yeah, I saw that you have a number of prints up now. Can you maybe describe what that project's about and what motivated you to go down that path?
For sure. So back in like 2013, like after I did the first 4 city prints of my own, like Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, Quebec City, the city of Sherbrooke hired me to make a map of Sherbrooke in the same style. And in my research, I found this incredible map. And I guess it's like kind of a map. It's more as if let's say it was 1880 and you were an artist and you pretended that you're in a balloon high above a city and you were looking down on it and you draw absolutely as much as you could see. And I was just fascinated by this. Like the level of detail was incredible. It was black and white, which I'm a big fan of. And it just seemed to like really capture Sherbrooke in a very skilled, very focused, incredibly detail oriented way. So I thought that was great. Filed it away in my head. Finish the Sherbrooke project, and then I work on Winnipeg a little later. And in my research, I find another map like that of Winnipeg this time, like made 1890, and I was fascinated. Then in Vancouver, I was working on that, and I found another map, 1898. It was like color, gorgeous, and I thought, okay, there are 3 of these things. Generally same aesthetic, different authors, artists, that is, similar format. So I did some searching around, and I found that from about 1860 to 1920, about 400 different illustrators wandered around North America drawing bird's eye view portraits of cities. And they made about 3,000, 4,000 maps like that. There was a European tradition of this before, but Americans, they basically like assembly lined it, where there are some artists who had done like 400 of them over the course of like decades and built entire careers on. So I got very excited by these maps because, reading about the artists who made them, I just felt a kinship with them. Like, I mean, I'm a commercial artist 90% of the time. What these people did was very commercial. They basically made sure that the cities they were drawing were attractive, that it was something that people wanted to look at. Their audience was definitely people with enough money to buy a 4-foot by 6-foot print and stick it on their business wall. So, yeah, I felt a real kinship with these guys. And I realized, and all of these are in the public domain. And it's fairly easy to get high resolution files of these. And I've got this gorgeous printer in my studio that does 17 inches by 22 inches with like great quality. And I was like, what happens if I put all these things into one pile? And the thing is the Civic Atlas. where my assistant Zinta and I have found about 360 of these maps, cleaned them up, got them in a state that people would probably be happy to put them on their walls. And we offer them by mail order from our online shop. And it's pretty excited about the project. We put a lot of time into it this couple of years. I did the first ever, the first exhibition of all of the Canadian maps since 1976. I did that last fall here in Montreal at a place called Espace Pop. The National Map Collection did a show of them in 1976, but otherwise these things have just been buried. So yeah, pretty neat project.
I don't know whether to be thankful or to curse you for the amount of time I'm going to lose going through all of these.
Yeah, as a resource for urban planners and historians, those things are fantastic. I mean, they're not perfect, but they're not Salvador Dali, right? Like, you can still get a reading of a lot of places through them. And interestingly enough, the Calgary map, which is kind of an outlier, it's drawn as if from an even higher altitude. It's still beautiful. Mm-hmm. It's actually the best-selling print in the entire collection. So,
was that right?
Yeah, Go for it. Thanks, Calgary.
Yeah. Well, very cool. Okay, so we just have one more question I have for you, and that's something we're asking everyone on the podcast. If you can tell us one city you love and why you love it, we're going to assemble all of these into a giant list of great urban places to go to.
Oh my, I'm going to have to say Montreal. There's a reason I live here. It's alternately absolutely beautiful and a giant pile of trash. And like the juxtapositions here are incredible. Like, I think about that Laurentian hotel building that was bulldozed after 30 years. Like, why? And it was also directly across a beautiful square from my actual favorite building in Montreal, being the Sun Life building. And just that contrast that exists here is fantastic. There's so much history and so many different states of disrepair. And some of it actually well kept. Yeah, it's pretty neat. And also just the combination of like European and North American ideas coming together here, and acting on the buildings, that is fantastic.
You can learn more about Raymond at 15, spelled out, FIFTEEN.ca, or you can also find him on Instagram. In this episode, you also heard from Mark Rimmer, our graphic designer pal that we share studio space with at Blank Page Studio in Calgary. 360 Degree City is created by the team at Intelligent Futures. You can learn more at 360degree.city. We would love it if you wrote a review about the podcast. We'd really love to hear your feedback. Raymond is in a band called the Famines, so we thought we'd leave you with one of their songs. I'm John Lewis. Thanks for stopping by.